All right, it's time for the next video in the summer inventory update tour series for 2023. This is what I call my Mexican Plum Garden Bed. It is the most challenging garden bed that I have on my entire property. It is I guess it would be west-northwest facing hill and an extreme slope. Don't know if you can see it, but way down there, it's probably about a 6-foot drop in about 20 to or so feet, 25 feet maybe. So you can work out what that slope is. So let's take a look at what we have. This big beautiful beast is of course, mostly what you're going to see in terms of the trees that I'm going to highlight here that I've planted are Mexican plum. That's why it's called the Mexican Plum Garden Bed. But this one is one that I trained up in a pot for a couple of years to plant here. When I first planted the Mexican plums, I did it by seed, and as soon as they were probably, I don't know, a foot tall, I took them out and planted them in bare root.
That don't make no sense.
That did not work very well. I still have a few that are alive, but you'll see the difference here in a second. The seeds were sourced from various areas around where I'm located, from wild trees. So, as I mentioned before on this channel, I like to grab the exact phenotypes from my area as close to my location as I can get before I go looking elsewhere. So I was fortunate and found a source of Mexican plum seeds. I guess that trunk down there is probably about 1 inch in diameter at most. And it's approximately 5.5 feet tall or so. Now, one thing I want to point out, you'll see these 2 stumps. That's actually an accident. I got too aggressive trimming. But as we go back, you'll see some other trunks that are actually cedars, ash juniper. Us Texas boys, we call that cedar. That have been pruned down to allow light in to this garden bed. Rather than killing off all the trees, I tend to just keep them pruned down to give the Mexican plums an advantage until they get established, at which point I'll probably let it go back to the way it was. Try to help the succession along, the natural succession, if as... Yeah, you know what I mean? Like... From conifer to deciduous, try to help the natural succession along as best as I can. What is this? Nice little spider here. I just now noticed them. Okay, now I've got some plants down here that I don't know if I planted them, but I'm going to put them in the video because these are as much for me as they are for anybody else, to help me remember what I've got growing down here. Not sure what this is. At first I thought it might be a squash of some kind, but look in here, I don't think it is. So hopefully they keep living and we'll see what comes from it. All right, here's another Mexican plum. This Mexican plum has been here for 4 years. Yeah, 4 years. And it is only about 1 foot tall. And that's one of them that I put in bare root. From when I sprouted it from seed, I took them out of the pot, and instead of just putting the whole root mass in, I took the soil off and put them in bare root, and it didn't work too well. At first, they actually grew pretty good. This one right here, used to be about 3 feet tall, which isn't too bad. But after the drought we had last year, I had a massive amount of dieback, and the winter prior to that drought killed off the tree pretty good, but it's still growing, so maybe it eventually will come back even stronger than it was before. So this tree that I started with is actually younger. It's about 3 years old, 2.5, 3 years old. It's one of the ones I started from seed but never took out of the pot and just kept potting it up. So, and then when I planted it, I just put the whole pot in the ground. Got a much better result. Which, some of you are probably watching and saying, well, of course. But at the time, I didn't know as much about planting trees as I do now, so it wasn't so intuitive to me back then. So I wanted to cut in and kind of explain why at the time, back then when I first planted this first round of trees, why I thought it was better to plant them bare root. At the time, I believed that you wanted to plant a tree in as much of the native soil as possible. So I took my potted tree, my very small potted tree, and washed away the soil so that way I had a bare root tree and put it in the ground to where 100% of what I was planting was using native soil. I now know that that is utter garbage, or at least it is garbage for the cross timbers when you have rocky, very clay-like soils. And it's better to just put the whole potted tree in the ground along with all the soil that the tree was potted in. And that right there is some bluestem. So I have a little bluestem growing all over the property. I got another one here. And I gather the seeds every time they seed in the fall and spread them around the property. So I've been getting it growing in multiple places. We have a lot of desmanthus growing. And this tree here is a dwarf black mulberry. So I used to have a Mexican plum there, and I needed a place to put, and it died, so I put that mulberry there. Here's another Mexican plum that I planted as a bare root plant. It's a bit taller, about 18 inches tall. And this Mexican plum back here has a little bit of a story. I planted it this year, and you can see it was much taller. This is one that I had potted up, and I've actually cut the top here. It had about another foot above it. I planted it. It was growing really well, and after about a week, maybe 2 weeks, I took a trip. And when I came back from the trip 3 days later, something, of course, had dug it up completely, just uprooted it. So I carefully put everything back down, and this is the sprout back since it got uprooted, which is not too terrible. There was a live Mexican plum here, another one of these bare root Mexican plums that at one point was about 4 feet tall, but it had died back all the way to the ground. And I was wanting, it was growing really slow because there's less light back here in this part of the bed. And so I was wanting to try to accelerate that a bit. So I figured I'd take one of the ones I have in pots that are taller, that can get up to the light. The more solar energy, they'll grow faster, and I'll get them established sooner. At least that was the thinking, until Mr. Armadillo decided to come along and thwart all of my plans. Yes, I could have put a fence around this, and the irony is, at one time I did have a fence around this to guard against rabbits, because rabbits do like to snip off the seedlings and eat the leaves off. But, I took the fence down, and this happened, and so basically I've got roughly the same amount of growth as if I had just left it in the ground. Now you'll see lots of other plants that were here before I did any planting, and I keep them trimmed down along with the ash juniper. And we have elbow bush. So you're going to see plenty of elbow bush in here. Foresteria pubescens. And I've got a horse mint, not doing too well. This is the time of the year where we've hit 100-degree temperatures for at least a week, and it's been a month without rain. So even the native plants are starting to struggle. My previous videos, I said at that point I had not given any supplemental watering. But now I have had, for the last 2 or 3 days, I've had to start doing supplemental water. So, and we got more desmanthus and another Mexican plum. This one's about 1 foot tall, planted last year. It was, again, actually taller, and we had some dieback, but it's coming back decently. And this big, beautiful beast is another like third year Mexican plum planted from a pot, and it's about 6 foot tall. Tons of desmanthus down here and elbow bush. And you see this hedge comes all the way across, and on the other side is the root crop garden bed that I just did a video on. And this is a female elbow bush. It actually produces little droops, and the wildlife love to eat them. More of that blue stem down in there, and bare grass. Got a Texas red oak in here. I need to dig that up and transplant it, or I may have to trim it, as it will shade out my Mexican plums. Got a willow that decided to grow, which is weird because it's not very wet down in this area. It's a very dry hill. And we've got another Mexican plum. This one is about, I'd say about 3 foot tall. It was planted last year, survived the winter. And we have this Mexican plum, which this is the tallest one. It's in more shade, which is pretty neat. I'd say it's about 6.5, 7 foot tall, growing nicely. And this is another one of those so-called bare root that I grew from seed. It's the tallest bare root I think I have, about 18 inches tall or so, maybe a little bit taller, 20 inches. Growing all right. Another one that died back due to the dry winter and summer. And at the very back of the garden bed, along with all the sunflower and dismanthus and elbow bush, we got more elbow bush, we have a thornless blackberry, which it gets a decent amount of sunlight most of the day. So I'm kind of surprised it's growing so well, but it does get shaded during the hottest part of the day. So I haven't really had to water it too much. For the first time this year, I had to water it 2 days ago. So, and that should, the last thing I'll speak on are these ash junipers. So you can see right next to the Mexican plum how I've trimmed these ash junipers down, and then they bud back lower and lower and lower, and so I just keep taking the tops out as I get bud back and growth lower down on the tree. Now, some of them are more cooperative than others. This one's got bud back super low, but then the guy next to it, which is a younger tree, he just doesn't want to send bud back any lower than about 5 foot. So let's see, I'll give you a perspective shot here at the base of the hill. I'm not completely at the base, but you can see how much higher up it is up at the top of the hill. All right, that concludes the Mexican Plum Garden Bed. Have a good one, folks. Little butterfly.